What if an entire colony, over 100 men, women, and children, vanished from the face of the earth? Imagine arriving at a bustling settlement, a beacon of your nation's ambition in a new world, only to find it utterly deserted. The houses are gone, dismantled with care. There are no bodies, no signs of a struggle, nothing but an eerie, deafening silence. And then you see it, carved into a wooden post, a single cryptic word: Croatoan. This is not the beginning of a horror movie. It's the beginning of America's oldest and most haunting unsolved mystery: the disappearance of the lost colony of Roanoke. For over 400 years, this enigma has captivated historians, archaeologists, and amateur sleuths alike. What happened to those settlers? Were they massacred? Did they succumb to disease? Or did they walk away from their settlement to start a new life, their descendants perhaps living among us today? The clues are few, the theories are many, and the truth remains buried under the sands of time. To understand how a community could simply cease to exist, we must first travel back to the late 16th century, to a world on the cusp of great change. This was the age of discovery. European powers were locked in a fierce competition for wealth, land, and global dominance. Spain, fat with gold from the Americas, was the reigning superpower. England, under the ambitious Queen Elizabeth I, was the underdog, a feisty island nation eager to claim its own piece of the New World. At the forefront of this ambition was Sir Walter Raleigh, a dashing courtier, poet, and explorer. Raleigh dreamed of an English empire in America, a permanent foothold that would not only provide valuable resources like timber, tobacco, and precious metals, but also serve as a strategic base for English privateers to raid Spanish treasure fleets returning from the Caribbean. It was a bold and dangerous vision. In 1584, Raleigh sponsored a reconnaissance mission to the coast of modern-day North Carolina. The expedition returned with glowing reports of a paradise, a land of abundance and friendly natives. They named the region Virginia in honor of the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. With this promising report, the stage was set for colonization. The first attempt in 1585 was a military expedition led by a soldier named Ralph Lane. About 100 men, mostly soldiers and artisans, landed on Roanoke Island, a small strip of land buffered from the Atlantic by the Outer Banks. They built a fort, explored the surrounding area, and began documenting the New World's wonders. But the initial optimism quickly soured. The colonists were soldiers, not farmers. They were utterly dependent on supplies from England and, more crucially, on the generosity of the local Native American tribes, primarily the Croatoan and the Croatoan peoples. At first, relations were civil. The English traded metal tools and trinkets for food. But the colonists' demands grew and their supplies dwindled. The English brought with them diseases to which the native population had no immunity, and suspicion began to fester. Ralph Lane, a man of military mind, saw conspiracy and threat in every shadow. He grew paranoid about a native uprising. This paranoia boiled over into violence. Lane led a preemptive strike, kidnapping and executing a local chief named Wingina. This single act of aggression shattered any hope of peaceful coexistence. The local tribes, once welcoming, became hostile, cutting off the colonists' food supply. Facing starvation and constant conflict, the first Roanoke colony was a failure. When the famous English sea captain Sir Francis Drake passed by in 1586 on his way back from raiding Spanish ports, the desperate colonists eagerly accepted his offer of a ride home. They abandoned their fort and sailed back to England, leaving behind a legacy of mistrust and bloodshed that would tragically shadow the next group of settlers. But Sir Walter Raleigh was not a man to be deterred by a single failure. He believed the mistake was in the approach. The first colony was a military outpost, not a true community. For a permanent settlement to succeed, it needed families. It needed roots. So in 1587, a second, much different expedition set sail. This group consisted of 117 men, women, and children, led by John White, an artist and friend of Raleigh who had been part of the first expedition. White's role in the first colony was to document the land, its people, and its flora and fauna, and his detailed watercolor paintings provide one of the most important visual records of 16th century Native American life. This time, he was returning not just as an artist, but as the governor of a new civilian colony. This was meant to be the city of Raleigh, a permanent English settlement in America. Among the colonists were White's own pregnant daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her husband, Ananias Dare. Shortly after their arrival at Roanoke, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. They named her Virginia Dare. She was the first English child born in the New World, a symbol of hope and a new beginning. But the hope was fragile. The colonists arrived too late in the season to plant crops for a successful harvest. The supplies they brought were meager, intended only to last until a resupply mission could arrive. Furthermore, the violent legacy of the Ralph Lane colony had not been forgotten. The local tribes were now deeply suspicious of the English. A colonist named George Howe was found dead, shot with 16 arrows while fishing for crabs alone. Fear began to grip the small community. They were isolated, low on supplies, and surrounded by a hostile population they did not understand. The colonists realized that without immediate help from England, they would not survive the coming winter. They pleaded with their governor, John White, to make the perilous journey back across the Atlantic to petition for more supplies, tools, and reinforcements. White was extremely reluctant. He didn't want to leave his family, including his newborn granddaughter, Virginia. He feared that if he left, the colonists might lose their resolve. But they insisted, even making him swear an oath that he would return. Before he departed, they agreed upon a crucial safety protocol. If the colonists had to leave Roanoke Island for any reason, they would carve their destination into a tree or post. If they were in distress or had been forced to leave under duress, they were to carve a Maltese cross above the name of the location. With this grim understanding, John White sailed for England in late August 1587, promising a swift return. He expected to be back in a matter of months. He had no way of knowing it would be 3 long, agonizing years before he saw the shores of Roanoke again. John White arrived in England to find a nation in crisis. King Philip II of Spain, furious with English privateering and religious differences, was preparing to launch a massive naval invasion. The legendary Spanish Armada was assembling. In response, Queen Elizabeth declared a state of emergency, commandeering all able-bodied ships for the defense of the realm. No vessel was permitted to leave for non-military purposes. White's desperate pleas for a ship to relieve his colony fell on deaf ears. The fate of England itself was at stake. He tried to sneak out with 2 small, ill-equipped ships, but they were quickly captured by French pirates and stripped of their cargo, forcing them to limp back to port. For 3 years, White was trapped, a helpless observer as the war with Spain raged on. We can only imagine his torment, thinking of his daughter, his granddaughter, and the 100 other souls he had left behind, their faces growing fainter with each passing day. Finally, in 1590, after the defeat of the Armada, White managed to secure passage on a privateering expedition that agreed to stop at Roanoke. After a long and difficult voyage, fraught with storms and battles, he at last approached the island in August, almost exactly 3 years after his departure. As they neared the shore, White's heart must have been pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. From the ship, he saw smoke rising from the island, a possible sign that the colony was still there, still waiting. But as the landing party rowed ashore, an unsettling silence greeted them. The smoke was from a simple forest fire, not a settler's hearth. They walked toward the site of the settlement, calling out, their voices swallowed by the dense woods. What they found was a ghost town. The entire settlement was gone. But it wasn't a scene of destruction. It hadn't been burned or ransacked. Instead, all the houses and cottages had been carefully dismantled. The area was enclosed by a sturdy defensive palisade or high wooden fence which hadn't been there when White left. It seemed the colonists had had time to build significant defenses before they vanished. The search party scoured the area. They found no human remains, no skeletons, no graves. They found no signs of a battle or a struggle. It was as if the colonists had packed up their belongings and simply walked away. Then they saw the clue, Carved into a large post at the entrance to the palisade was a single word in capital letters, Croatoan. Searching further, they found the letters CRO carved into another tree nearby. White's mind must have raced. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, located about 50 miles to the south. It was also the name of the friendly Native American tribe that inhabited that island, a tribe whose chief, Manteo, had traveled to England and been a staunch ally of the colonists. The message seemed clear. The colonists had moved to Croatoan Island, and crucially, there was no Maltese cross carved above the word. This was the prearranged signal. Its absence meant they had not left in distress. They had moved voluntarily, presumably to live with their native allies. A wave of relief must have washed over John White. His family and his colonists were alive. They were just somewhere else. His next course of action was obvious. He had to get to Croatoan Island. He and his men returned to the ship, ready to sail south. But the unforgiving nature of the New World had one more cruel twist in store. A powerful hurricane, common to the region in late summer, began to brew. The storm raged, battering the ships. A crucial anchor cable snapped, and the crew nearly lost control of the vessel. The captain, already impatient with this detour from his privateering mission, refused to risk his ship and crew any further in the treacherous coastal shoals known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. He forbade the journey to Croatoan. John White, a passenger on another man's ship, was powerless to object. The decision was made. They were returning to England. Defeated and heartbroken, White was forced to sail away, leaving the mystery of Croatoan unresolved. He would never again have the funds or opportunity to return to America. He died years later, never knowing the true fate of his daughter, his granddaughter Virginia, and the lost colony of Roanoke. And so, the mystery was born and the theories began to swirl. What really happened to those 117 people? The most widely accepted theory, supported by John White himself, is that the colonists willingly assimilated with the Croatoan tribe. The Croatoan carving is the primary piece of evidence. It was a message, not a warning. Life on Roanoke Island was untenable, facing starvation due to a severe drought, which we now know occurred thanks to tree ring data, and potential conflict with other tribes. Moving to live with friendly natives would have been a logical survival strategy. The dismantled houses suggest they took their building materials with them. Decades later, when the English established their next successful colony at Jamestown, they heard persistent rumors from the Powhatan tribe. They spoke of people living nearby who dressed like Englishmen, had two-story houses made of stone, and could read from a book. Explorer John Lawson, in the early 1700s, visited Hatteras Island and wrote that the natives there claimed to have ancestors with gray eyes who could speak from a book. Some even bore English surnames. In recent years, archaeology has provided tantalizing new evidence. The First Colony Foundation has conducted digs on Hatteras Island, the site of Croatoan. They have unearthed a fascinating mix of Native American pottery and late 16th century English artifacts, including parts of a sword, a gun flintlock, and lead seals, all in the same archaeological layers, suggesting two cultures living together. This points strongly towards at least some of the colonists integrating with the Croatoan people. But if assimilation is the answer, why did they never re-establish contact? The simple answer is that no one came looking for them for years. By the time Jamestown was founded 20 years later, a generation had passed. The assimilated colonists and their children may have had no desire to return to an English world they barely remembered. But other, more sinister theories persist. Another prominent theory is that the colonists were attacked and wiped out by the Spanish. Spain certainly had the motive. They considered English Virginia an encroachment on their territory and a threat to their treasure fleets. Spanish reconnaissance missions were actively searching for the English settlement. However, this theory has significant flaws. A Spanish attack would have been a brutal, violent affair. The settlement would likely have been burned to the ground, not carefully dismantled. The Spanish were also meticulous record keepers. A military victory of this magnitude, wiping out a rival's colony, would have been a source of immense pride, something to be boasted about in official reports to the king. Yet Spanish archives contain no mention of any such attack, and again, there was no Maltese cross distress signal. A similar theory posits a massacre not by the Spanish, but by hostile Native Americans. Perhaps a powerful tribe like the Powhatan Confederacy saw the English as invaders and decided to eliminate them. Indeed, the Jamestown leader, Captain John Smith, was told by the Powhatan chief, Senecal, that he had personally led an attack that wiped out a group of English settlers who had moved inland and were living with another tribe. This could explain the disappearance of some, if not all, of the colonists. Some historians speculate the colony split into smaller groups. One group went south to Croatoan, while another went north, up the Chowan River, toward the Chesapeake Bay, which was their original intended destination. This inland group could have been the one the Powhatan chief claimed to have destroyed. Archaeological evidence at a location known as Site X, about 50 miles inland, has revealed English pottery mixed with native artifacts, suggesting a small group of colonists may have lived there. This theory suggests a fragmented fate. Some assimilated, others were killed. What about less dramatic possibilities? Could the colonists have simply succumbed to the harsh realities of the New World? Disease could have swept through the settlement, killing everyone. Or, facing starvation during the documented drought, they might have perished one by one. While plausible, this doesn't account for the key pieces of evidence. It doesn't explain the carefully dismantled settlement. It doesn't explain the complete lack of human remains. And it most certainly doesn't explain the Croatoan carving. A community dying of plague or starvation would not have the time or energy to neatly pack up and carve a message pointing to a place they never reached. One final, desperate theory suggests the colonists tried to sail home themselves. They were left with a small ship called a pinnace. Perhaps in their desperation, they overloaded the small vessel with men, women, and children and made a doomed attempt to cross the vast Atlantic. A single storm could have sent them to the bottom of the ocean, leaving no trace. This would explain the complete disappearance, but it directly contradicts the clue they left behind. Why carve Croatoan if you're sailing for England? It remains the most unlikely of the major theories. For centuries, the story of Roanoke was just that, a story, a piece of American folklore. But modern science and archaeology are peeling back the layers of time, replacing speculation with evidence. The work on Hatteras Island and at inland sites like Site X is slowly building a case for the assimilation theory. It seems less likely that the colony was lost, and more likely that it simply evolved. The colonists, facing an impossible situation, chose survival over their English identity. They chose to become part of the very world they had intended to conquer. They assimilated, intermarried, and their English bloodline merged with the native people of the coast. The mystery of the lost colony is not just about what happened to them, but about what their story says about the brutal, complex, and often forgotten beginnings of America. It's a stark reminder that the line between civilization and wilderness, between conqueror and conquered, can be incredibly thin. The colonists of Roanoke were not mythical figures, they were real people. They were families with hopes and fears, led by a governor who was also a loving grandfather. John White's tragic story, his inability to return to his family, is the human heart of this historical puzzle. The word Croatoan was not a cry of despair, but a message of hope, a signpost pointing to a new life. A message its intended recipient, John White, tragically never got to follow. So did the lost colony vanish? Or did it simply transform? Did they perish in the unforgiving wilderness? Or did they become part of it, their DNA woven into the fabric of the New World? The final, definitive answer may forever elude us. The lost colony of Roanoke remains America's oldest unsolved mystery, a silent, 400-year-old question mark carved into the heart of the nation's origin story.